differently than they do. Their small, mildly annoying behavior arrives without any contradicted prediction attached to it. It's just noise, present, neutral, quickly forgotten. With someone you're close to, your brain has spent months or years building an enormous, mostly unconscious model of who this person is, their patterns, their consideration for you, their usual behavior in shared spaces. Every small annoying action from them isn't processed in isolation. It's processed against that entire accumulated model. And specifically, it's processed against an unspoken expectation that closeness itself seems to imply. If you really know and care about me, you should already know this bothers me. That expectation is rarely stated out loud. Often, it isn't even consciously formed, but it's there, operating quietly beneath the irritation, which is why the same small action from a stranger feels neutral, while from a partner, it feels almost like a small betrayal of the relationship itself. There's a second mechanism that compounds this, and it's specific to long-term closeness. Habituation without resolution. With a stranger, an annoying behavior is a single, isolated data point. It happens once, briefly, and disappears from your awareness entirely. With someone you live with, work closely with, or see daily, the same small behavior doesn't happen once. It repeats, in repetition. Instead of producing tolerance the way it sometimes does with neutral stimuli, often produces the opposite effect when the stimulus is mildly negative and tied to a person whose behavior you have ongoing expectations about. Each repetition adds to an accumulating sense that the issue is being ignored, rather than simply registering as a new, unrelated instance. This is why a behavior that wouldn't bother you on day 1 can become intensely irritating by month 6. Not because the behavior itself changed, but because you're a stranger on the train chews loudly, taps their foot, leaves their bag in your way, and you barely register it. Mild, forgettable, gone in seconds. Your partner does the exact same thing at dinner, and something in you tightens immediately. The irritation is sharper, faster, and somehow feels more personal, even though, logically, this is someone you love far more than any stranger you'll ever pass on a train. If you've ever felt confused or even ashamed by how easily the people closest to you can irritate you, more easily, in fact, than people who mean nothing to you, this video is going to explain exactly why that happens and why it has almost nothing to do with how much you care about them. By the end of this video, you'll understand the specific psychological mechanism that makes proximity lower your tolerance instead of raising it, why this isn't a sign your relationship is broken, and a concrete way to restore tolerance without suppressing how you actually feel. Stay until the end, because the last part explains why this pattern tends to get worse, not better, the longer a relationship lasts, unless you understand what's actually driving it. Let's start with the part that confuses most people. Why would caring about someone make you less tolerant of their small behaviors, not more? The answer lies in a concept psychologists call expectation violation. The specific discomfort that occurs not when something bad happens, but when something happens that contradicts an implicit prediction you didn't know you were making. And here's the key insight. The closer you are to someone, the more implicit predictions you've built about how they should behave, simply because you have so much more data about them than you do about a stranger. With a stranger, you have essentially no expectations to violate. You don't know how they normally act, so there's no internal model predicting they'll behave. Nervous system has stopped treating each occurrence as isolated and started treating it as evidence of an ongoing, unaddressed pattern. The 41st time someone leaves a cabinet door open carries the invisible weight of the previous 40 times, even if none of those previous times were ever discussed. This combination, implicit expectation plus accumulating repetition, explains something many people experience but rarely articulate clearly. Feeling disproportionately irritated by something objectively minor, while simultaneously feeling guilty for being irritated, precisely because they know, rationally, that the behavior itself doesn't justify the intensity of the reaction. Both things are true at once. The behavior really is minor, and the irritation really is intense. The gap between those two facts isn't a contradiction. It's the visible signature of expectation violation accumulating over time. There's a third layer worth naming directly, because it explains why this specifically happens with people we love, rather than simply with people we see often, like coworkers or roommates we're not emotionally attached to. With people we love, there's an additional, deeper expectation operating beneath the surface, ones about specific behaviors. The expectation of being prioritized. Small, considerate behaviors. Closing the cabinet. Lowering the volume. Remembering a preference. Function, often unconsciously, as evidence that you matter to this person, that your comfort is being actively considered. When those small behaviors are absent, the irritation isn't really about the cabinet door. It's about what the open cabinet door seems to imply. That in that small moment, you weren't being considered at all. This is why people often describe feeling hurt, not just annoyed, by behaviors that are objectively trivial. The behavior is trivial. The implied message, real or imagined, is not. So how do you actually work with this, instead of either suppressing the irritation entirely or letting it escalate into resentment? First, separate the behavior from the interpretation you've attached to it. Before reacting, ask specifically, am I irritated by what happened, or by what I believe it means about whether I'm being considered? Often the behavior itself is genuinely minor, and almost all of the emotional charge is coming from the interpretation layered on top of it, an interpretation that may or may not be accurate. Second, make the implicit expectation explicit, ideally before resentment accumulates rather than after. Most expectation violations in close relationships are never actually stated. You expect your partner to know that loud chewing bothers you, without ever having clearly said so, and then feel hurt when the expectation goes unmet. Naming the expectation directly, calmly, specifically outside the heat of the moment, removes the requirement that the other person silently intuits something you've never actually communicated. Third, address patterns while they're still small, rather than letting 40 repetitions accumulate silently before saying anything. A behavior mentioned calmly on its third occurrence carries far less emotional weight than the same behavior addressed for the first time after months of silent accumulation. Because in the second scenario, you're not really responding to one instance. You're responding to an entire backlog the other person never knew existed. Fourth, remind yourself, specifically in the moment of irritation, that the intensity of your reaction is largely a function of closeness, not a measurement of how serious the behavior actually is. This doesn't mean dismissing your irritation as invalid. It means correctly locating its source, proximity, and accumulated expectation, rather than mistaking it for proof that the behavior itself is unusually severe. Here's what ties this together. You're not more easily irritated by people you love because something is wrong with the relationship, or because you secretly care less than you think you do. You're more easily irritated because closeness builds an intricate, mostly unconscious model of expectation that strangers never have the chance to build. And every small violation of that model carries the invisible weight of everything it seems to imply about being known, considered, and prioritized. The irritation was never really about the small thing. It was about what the small thing seemed to confirm. If this explains something you felt but never fully understood, tell us in the comments about a small, objectively minor thing that consistently irritates you more than it logically should, coming from someone you actually love. And if you want to keep uncovering the hidden mechanics behind your own relationships, the next video is right there, waiting for you.